Have you ever walked past someone and seen only their uniform? The cleaner pushing a cart down a sterile hallway. The cashier scanning your groceries. The security guard standing watch in the rain. Have you ever wondered what battles they've fought, what mountains they've climbed, what brilliance they hide behind a veil of routine? We place people into boxes, defined by their jobs, their clothes, their station. But what if the person you dismiss as invisible is the only one who can save you? This is a story about a woman they tried to break, a woman they left for nothing, a woman who carried the soul of a warrior inside the quiet shell of a janitor. They thought her spirit was as fragile as glass. They were about to learn that some people are forged in fire, and fire doesn't forget the steel it has made. They injured her to win, to silence her, to put her back in the box they had built for her. But they made one catastrophic mistake. They forgot that Navy SEALs don't stop for broken bones. Her name was Maya, and her story begins where most would think it ends, in the shadows, with a mop in her hand and a ghost in her eyes. She was a phantom in the gleaming, glass and steel cathedral of Innovate Dynamics, a place that worshipped the future but was blind to the genius cleaning its floors. Every night, she moved through the building with a silent efficiency that bordered on supernatural. Her cart made no sound. Her footsteps left no echo. She was just a shape in a gray jumpsuit, her face obscured by the bill of a worn baseball cap, her presence acknowledged only by the pristine surfaces she left in her wake. The heart of Innovate Dynamics was the Ether Lab, a brilliant white chamber where the company's magnum opus, a revolutionary reconnaissance drone, was failing. It was a billion-dollar disaster, a marvel of engineering that couldn't fly straight for more than 90 seconds before its sophisticated systems turned it into a wobbling, unpredictable brick. Inside this chamber, another kind of storm was always brewing. Alastair Finch, the company's CEO, stood like a thundercloud, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. He was a man who had built an empire on precision, and the ether drone was an offense to his very being. His voice, usually a tool of inspiration, was now a weapon, sharp and cold. Marcus, he said, the name cutting through the tense silence of the lab, another failure. Another simulation that ends with our billion-dollar marvel nosediving into a digital mountain. Explain it to me. Again Marcus Thorne, the lead engineer, flinched. He was a man who wore his Ivy League education like a suit of armor, but right now, it felt like paper. He gestured at a holographic display showing a cascade of chaotic red lines. It's the resonant frequency, Alastair. The microvibrations from the propulsion system are creating an unforeseen harmonic cascade. It's complex. We are pushing the boundaries of known physics here, he spoke with an air of intellectual superiority, a defense mechanism he used to shield his own profound incompetence. From the other side of the glass wall, Maya paused her cleaning. She watched them, her expression unreadable. She wasn't just wiping away smudges, she was absorbing information. She saw the holographic model, her eyes tracing the flawed airflow dynamics. She saw the equations scrawled on the whiteboards, a mess of overwrought calculations designed to look impressive rather than be effective. She saw the problem. It wasn't complex. It was simple. It was a foundational error, a miscalculation in the winglet's design that was creating vortex shedding, a turbulence so basic they had built a mountain of code to compensate for it instead of just fixing the source. It was like trying to patch a hole in a dam with 100 silk handkerchiefs instead of one solid plug of concrete. Finch wasn't buying Marcus's excuses. Don't talk to me about boundaries, Marcus. Talk to me about results. The Department of Defense isn't interested in our beautiful failures. They want a drone that works. We are 6 months behind schedule and 400 million over budget. Your complex problem is about to bankrupt this company. His gaze swept the lab, over the heads of the defeated-looking junior engineers, and for a fleeting moment, it passed over Maya. He saw her for what she was, part of the background, a fixture, no different from the fire extinguisher on the wall. He saw a janitor. He didn't see the eyes of a strategist, the hands of a surgeon, the mind that had once designed systems for missions that officially never happened. Marcus, feeling the pressure, deflected. We need more resources. A bigger team. The algorithm needs a complete overhaul. He was a master of creating work, of complicating the simple to ensure his own indispensability. He believed that if a problem was confusing enough, no one could blame him for not solving it. Maya finished the glass, her reflection staring back at him for a moment before she moved on, pushing her silent cart down the long, empty corridor. She had heard enough. She knew that men like Marcus didn't find solutions, they created problems. And she knew that men like Finch, for all their power, were trapped by the experts they chose to trust. The lab would stay locked in its cycle of failure, a prison of its own making. But tonight, something was different. A flicker of the person she used to be, the operator who never left a mission unfinished, stirred within her. The ghost in her eyes opened them, just for a moment, and decided to act. The building slowly emptied, the hum of innovation giving way to the quiet, rhythmic breathing of dormant machines. The frantic energy of the day was replaced by the deep, lonely silence of the night, a silence Maya knew better than anyone. It was her sanctuary, the space where she could be herself, unseen and unjudged. It was in these hours, between midnight and dawn, that the ghosts of her past walked with her. Ghosts of sand-swept airfields, of the tense quiet inside a transport plane, of calculations made under unimaginable pressure. She had traded that world for this one, for the simplicity of a mop and bucket, believing the quiet would heal the wounds she carried. But the mind of an engineer, the soul of a warrior, does not simply go to sleep. It waits. Tonight, it had awoken. She returned to the ether lab, using her master keycard to override the lock. The vast, white room was illuminated by the soft glow of a single monitor that Marcus had forgotten to shut down. On the screen was the latest failed simulation, the drone frozen in its final, fatal tumble. It was a monument to their arrogance. Maya walked past the gleaming, unassembled prototype, a beautiful sculpture of carbon fiber and titanium that was utterly useless. Her eyes weren't on the hardware. They were on the code, the digital soul of the machine. She stood before the monitor, her brow furrowed in concentration. She could see it all so clearly, the flawed logic, the redundant subroutines, the elegant but incorrect math. They were trying to build a skyscraper on a foundation of sand. She saw the lines of code Marcus had written to mask the initial error, a tangled web of patches and workarounds that only made the instability worse. He wasn't solving the problem, he was just dressing it up in a tuxedo. Her gaze drifted to a nearby table, cluttered with discarded printouts and empty coffee cups. Beside it was a small whiteboard, covered in Marcus's frantic, useless diagrams. A single dry erase marker lay on the ledge. An impulse, sharp and undeniable, seized her. It was the same impulse that had told her to reroute power on a damaged helicopter mid-flight, the same instinct that had helped her design a communication system that could cut through enemy jamming. It was the call of the problem, the siren song that no true engineer can resist. She picked up the marker. Her hand, so accustomed to the grip of a mop handle, felt the familiar, comfortable weight of a tool of creation. She looked around, not for a piece of paper, but for something more transient, something that wouldn't betray her. Her eyes landed on a stack of cheap paper napkins by the coffee machine. She took one. It was flimsy, insignificant, disposable. Perfect. With swift, precise strokes, her hand moved across the napkin. There were no wasted motions. She drew a simple, elegant modification to the drone's winglet, changing its angle of attack by a mere 3 degrees, and adding a small, curved edge to disrupt the vortex of turbulent air. Below the drawing, she wrote a single, clean equation. It wasn't new physics, it was old physics, applied with a wisdom and clarity that the entire ether team lacked. It was the kind of solution that didn't scream for attention. It was quiet, efficient, and devastatingly effective. It was the answer. For a moment she stood there, looking at the ink on the flimsy paper. It was a message in a bottle, cast into an ocean of ignorance. She felt a pang of her old self, a thrill of creation she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Then the fear returned. The fear of being seen, of being dragged back into a world that had cost her everything. She quickly wiped her fingerprints from the marker and placed the napkin directly on the keyboard of the main console, where it couldn't be missed. It was a ghost's whisper, a clue left in the dark. She turned and walked out of the lab, melting back into the shadows. The automatic door hissed shut behind her, sealing the secret within the silent room. As she resumed her rounds, the familiar weight of her anonymity settled back over her like a heavy cloak. She was Maya the janitor again. The napkin was a risk, a dangerous departure from the quiet life she had so carefully constructed. But the problem had called to her, and for the first time in a long time, she had answered. She didn't know if they would see it, if they would understand. But she had completed her mission. She had provided the solution. The rest was up to them. The next morning, the ether lab was once again a pressure cooker. Alistair Finch had arrived before the sun, his patience worn down to a single, frayed thread. He stood over the main console, his reflection a grim mask in the dark screen, when his eyes caught it. A napkin. A single, flimsy piece of paper sitting on the keyboard, bearing a crude but precise sketch and an equation. He picked it up, his brow furrowed. It was absurdly simple. For a moment, he thought it was a joke, some prank from the night shift. Then Marcus Thorne swaggered in, a fresh wave of cologne and false confidence preceding him. Morning, Alistair. I was up half the night running diagnostics. I think I'm onto a new approach. His voice trailed off as he saw the napkin in Finch's hand. He peered at it and let out a short, derisive laugh. What's that? Janitorial graffiti. Probably a suggestion to improve our trash can aerodynamics. He reached to take it, to crumple it, to toss it away with the rest of the day's garbage. Don't, Finch's voice was sharp, commanding. He held the napkin up, studying the elegant simplicity of the equation. Something about it resonated with him, a gut feeling that cut through his frustration. He wasn't an engineer, but he was a brilliant systems thinker. He recognized efficiency when he saw it, and this was the epitome of it. What is this, Marcus? Marcus scoffed. It's nothing. A doodle. Look at the drawing, it's childish. And the equation is a basic principle of fluid dynamics. It's irrelevant to the complexities we're dealing with, but Finch wasn't listening. He was looking at the over-engineered mess on their screens, and then back at the napkin. It was the difference between a tangled knot and a straight line. Humor me, Finch said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Take this drawing. This exact design. And this equation. Plug them into the simulation. Now Marcus's face tightened with indignation. Alistair, that's a waste of valuable time. My team is on the verge of a breakthrough. Your team, Finch interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous low, is on the verge of being unemployed. Run the simulation. Defeated and humiliated, Marcus snatched the napkin and barked orders at a junior engineer, who quickly began inputting the new parameters. The other engineers gathered around, smirking at the absurdity of it all. Taking engineering advice from a janitor's doodle. The simulation began. The holographic drone appeared on the display, lifting off its virtual runway. The team watched, expecting the familiar, sickening wobble to begin within seconds. But it didn't. The drone climbed, steady and true. 10 seconds. 30. A minute. 2 minutes. The red lines of instability that had plagued every previous test were gone, replaced by smooth, clean vectors of green. A stunned silence fell over the lab. The junior engineer's jaw was slack. Stability, 100%, he whispered, as if he couldn't believe the words. Flight path nominal. All systems green. Marcus stared at the screen, his face draining of all color. It wasn't just working, it was perfect. The simple, elegant solution he had dismissed as trash had just solved a billion-dollar problem in less than 5 minutes. Finch felt a surge of adrenaline, a thrill of discovery. He turned the napkin over in his hands. This wasn't a lucky guess. This was brilliance. Who, he said, his voice a low growl. Who left this here? No one answered. The engineers just shook their heads, mystified. Finch's mind raced. He stormed out of the lab and headed straight for the security office. I want the footage from the ether lab. All of it. From midnight until now, the guard complied, pulling up the feeds. Finch watched impatiently as the hours flew by in fast forward. He saw the engineers leave, the lights dim. And then, he saw her. The janitor. A figure in gray, moving silently. He watched her pause by the monitor. He saw her pick up the marker. He saw her write on the napkin. He leaned closer to the screen, trying to see her face, but it was hidden by the cap. He saw her place the napkin on the console and disappear. A janitor. It made no sense. And yet, the proof was right there, flying a perfect, stable path in his lab. Finch felt a strange mix of disbelief and hope. He had been looking for a genius, a savior for his company. He had been looking in boardrooms, in universities, in the resumes of the world's top engineers. It never occurred to him to look at the woman who cleaned his floors. He now had a new mission, to find this ghost, this janitor, and find out who she really was. Finch found her in a dimly lit utility corridor on the sublevel, meticulously cleaning her cart. The air smelled of disinfectant and bleach, a world away from the ionized, climate-controlled atmosphere of the labs above. Maya didn't look up as he approached. She sensed his presence, the expensive leather of his shoes squeaking on the polished concrete, but she kept her focus on her task, hoping he would pass by. She had spent years perfecting the art of being invisible, it was a survival skill. But Finch stopped directly in front of her. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was calm, but it held an undercurrent of intensity that made the hairs on her arms stand up. She finally looked up, her eyes meeting his from under the brim of her cap. They were wary, intelligent, and held a depth that startled him. He held up the napkin. "Did you write this?" he asked, his question direct and unadorned. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment she had dreaded. The breach in her defenses. Her first instinct was denial, the shield she had used for so long. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice quiet, flat. "I just cleaned the floors." Finch studied her face. He saw the flicker of something in her eyes, not just fear but calculation. He saw the way her hands, though chapped from cleaning chemicals, were steady and strong, the hands of someone used to working with tools, not just a mop. "Don't lie to me," he said, his tone softening slightly. It wasn't an accusation, it was a plea. "I'm not in the business of firing people for being brilliant. I'm in the business of finding them. That sketch, that equation, it saved $1 billion project. It wasn't a guess. It was an answer. I want to know who gave it." Maya remained silent, her jaw set. She couldn't afford this. She couldn't be dragged back into the light. The shadows were safe. The quiet was peace. It was just a doodle, she insisted, her voice barely a whisper. "I saw the pictures on the screen. I just copied what I saw." Finch shook his head slowly. "No. You didn't copy. You corrected. You saw a mistake that a team of 50 PhDs missed. You simplified a problem they had spent millions trying to complicate. I've been running your solution all morning. It's not just a fix, it's a masterpiece of efficiency." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Who are you?" The question hung in the sterile air between them. It was more than just a request for her name. He was asking about the person behind the uniform, the mind behind the quiet facade. Maya felt the walls she had built around herself begin to crack. The janitor persona was crumbling under the weight of his direct, perceptive gaze. He wasn't mocking her. He wasn't dismissing her. He was seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time since she had started this new, anonymous life. A life of penance, a life of hiding. Her training screamed at her to disengage, to deflect, to disappear. But another part of her, the part that had scribbled on that napkin, was tired of hiding. It was tired of the quiet. It wanted, just for a second, to be acknowledged. Her shoulders slumped in a barely perceptible sigh of defeat. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. The vortex shedding, she said, her voice clear and steady now, stripped of its earlier pretense. Your team was focused on the symptoms, the harmonic cascade. But that was a secondary effect. The root cause was the winglet design. It was creating unstable air, a chaotic vortex. All the code in the world can't fix bad aerodynamics. You don't patch a broken bone with a bandage. You set the bone. Finch listened, captivated. She spoke with an authority and clarity that was utterly at odds with her gray jumpsuit. She wasn't just repeating jargon, she understood the core principles with an innate, profound certainty. He knew, in that moment, that his instincts had been right. This woman was the key. The news that the janitor had been invited to consult on the Ether project spread through the lab like a virus. It was met with a mixture of disbelief, amusement, and from Marcus Thorne, pure, unadulterated rage. He saw it as a personal insult, a public humiliation orchestrated by Finch to undermine his authority. When Maya walked into the Ether lab, not in her gray jumpsuit but in simple, clean clothes, the team fell silent. They stared at her as if she were an alien species. She kept her head down, her hands shoved into her pockets, feeling the weight of 100 skeptical eyes. Marcus stood in the center of the room, arms crossed, a sneer plastered on his face. Well, well, look what we have here, he announced, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Our secret weapon has arrived. Please enlighten us. Tell us more about these vortexes. He made the word sound ridiculous. I'm sure your years of experience pushing a broom have given you unique insights into computational fluid dynamics, a few of the engineers loyal to him snickered. Maya felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks, but her expression remained a stoic mask. She had faced down men with guns and bombs. A man with an inflated ego was nothing. Finch stepped forward, his presence immediately silencing the room. Marcus, that's enough. Maya is here as a member of this team, because she demonstrated more insight in a 2-inch sketch than you have in 2 years. She will be treated with respect. Marcus was livid. Respect? Alistair, this is a farce. You're betting the future of this company on the random scribbles of a cleaner. We have protocols. We have standards. You can't just... He gestured wildly at Maya. You can't just let her touch this project. Ask her for her credentials. Go on, ask her where she got her degree. The University of Mop and Bucket. The insult hung in the air, sharp and ugly. The junior engineers, who had been quietly impressed by the simulation results, now looked uncomfortable. They were caught between their arrogant boss and the quiet woman who had effortlessly solved their biggest problem. Finch turned to Maya, his expression calm. He didn't ask the question to challenge her, but to empower her. He's right, Maya. They deserve to know who you are. Tell them. Maya took a deep breath. She looked not at Marcus, but at the faces of the younger engineers, the ones who looked tired and beaten down by Marcus's bullying. She saw a flicker of hope in their eyes, a desire for a different way of doing things. I don't have a degree, she said quietly. Marcus let out a triumphant laugh. I knew it. This is insane. I didn't finish, Maya continued, her voice gaining strength, cutting through his laughter. I was recruited before I could. I was an aeronautical engineer. For a special projects division in the United States Navy. The lab went dead silent. The mention of the Navy, specifically special projects, carried a weight that even Marcus couldn't dismiss. It hinted at a world of classified, high-stakes engineering far beyond what they did in this clean, corporate lab. I worked on unmanned aerial systems, Maya stated, her gaze now fixed on the holographic drone. Specifically, rapid deployment and battlefield modifications. I left the service after an incident. I wanted a quiet life. That's all. She didn't offer details. She didn't need to. The quiet confidence with which she spoke was more powerful than any diploma Marcus could wave in their faces. She had been in the field. She had built things that had to work, not just in a simulation, but in the chaos of reality, where there were no second chances. Finch nodded, a look of profound vindication on his face. He turned to the stunned team. Maya will have full access to all project data. She will work directly with me. She is not here to advise. She is here to lead. This is no longer your team, Marcus. It's hers. The declaration was a thunderclap. Marcus stood there, his face a grotesque mask of fury and disbelief. He had just been usurped, not by a rival engineer from another company, but by the janitor. He looked at Maya, his eyes filled with a venomous hatred. He had been publicly humiliated, his authority stripped away in front of his entire team. In that moment, he didn't see a brilliant engineer. He saw an enemy. An obstacle to be removed. And Marcus Thorne was a man who always removed obstacles, one way or another. He would not let this stand. He would find a way to prove she was a fraud, to break her, to make everyone see that he was the rightful leader. His war for control of the Ether project had just begun. The week that followed was a revolution in miniature. Maya moved through the Ether project like a force of nature. She was not a manager in the traditional sense, she was a field commander. She didn't hold meetings, she held briefings. She didn't delegate, she demonstrated. Her first act was to scrap nearly 70% of Marcus's code. This is clutter, she declared, pointing at lines of elegant but useless algorithms. It's a monument to the problem, not a path to the solution. We're rebuilding from the ground up. Simplicity. Durability. Efficiency. That's the mission. The younger engineers, initially hesitant, were quickly won over. They had been suffocating under Marcus's regime of micromanagement and theoretical nonsense. Maya was different. She listened to their ideas. She worked alongside them, her sleeves rolled up, writing code, soldering connections, recalibrating sensors. She taught them how to think like operators, not just academics. A machine has to work when it's cold, when it's dirty, and when the person using it is scared, she told them, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won experience. Perfection is the enemy of good enough. We're not building a museum piece. We're building a tool. Marcus watched from the sidelines, demoted to a glorified observer. He was a ghost in his own lab, forced to watch as Maya systematically dismantled his work and with it, his legacy. Every success she achieved was another nail in his professional coffin. He saw the respect in the other engineers' eyes when they looked at her. He saw the admiration on Finch's face. His resentment festered, curdling into a dark, desperate resolve. He began to sabotage her efforts in subtle ways, mislabeling component trays, accidentally deleting minor data files, spreading rumors that she was reckless and cutting corners. But Maya was too vigilant. Her training had prepared her for this kind of internal threat. She double-checked everything, trusted no one implicitly, and built redundancies into her workflow. Her progress was relentless. In just 6 days, the Ether drone was transformed. It was no longer a fragile, temperamental prototype. It was a robust, responsive, and ruthlessly efficient machine. The final demonstration for the Department of Defense officials was scheduled for the following day. A multi-billion-dollar contract, the future of Innovate Dynamics, rested on this single test flight. The night before the demonstration, the lab was quiet except for the low hum of the drone's standby systems. Maya was performing one last diagnostic, a final, meticulous check of every circuit and every mechanical joint. She trusted her team, but her training had ingrained in her the mantra, trust, but verify. She was on her knees, examining the hydraulic actuators in the portside landing gear, when Marcus appeared. He was carrying a heavy crate filled with diagnostic tools, his movements unnaturally casual. Working late, he asked, his voice strained with false friendliness. Just making sure everything is perfect for your big day. Maya didn't look up. It's our big day, Marcus, of course, he said, the sneer audible in his voice. He walked past her, deliberately choosing a path that brought him close to the drone. Then, with a sudden, feigned stumble, he let the heavy crate slip from his grasp. "Whoops," he cried out, a moment too late. The crate crashed to the floor. It wasn't the crate that was the danger. It was the impact. The vibration caused a heavy, unsecured maintenance strut connected to the landing gear assembly to swing loose. It moved with terrifying speed, a pendulum of solid steel. Maya heard the sharp clang, and the whistle of displaced air. She tried to scramble back, but she wasn't fast enough. The strut slammed into her left ankle with sickening force. A sharp, white-hot agony shot up her leg. She cried out, collapsing to the floor, clutching her ankle. The pain was immense, blinding. Marcus rushed over, his face a perfect mask of concern. "Oh my God. Maya. Are you okay?" "I'm so sorry, I tripped, the crate was so heavy." He knelt beside her, his voice filled with fake panic. But as he looked down at her face contorted in pain, his eyes held a flicker of cold, triumphant satisfaction. He had done it. He hadn't left a mark on the drone, nothing that could be traced back to him. But he had taken their new leader off the board. There was no way she could be at the demonstration tomorrow. With her gone, he would step in. He would present the drone. He would answer the questions. He would be the hero. He had injured her to win. As medics rushed into the lab, carefully lifting Maya onto a stretcher, Marcus watched, his expression one of deep, feigned sympathy. He had set the bone, he thought to himself, twisting her earlier words into a cruel, private joke. He had set things right. He was back in control. The infirmary was cold and sterile, the antithesis of the vibrant, chaotic energy of the lab. Maya lay on a crisp white bed, her leg elevated, her ankle encased in a thick, immobilizing cast. The X-ray on the light box beside her told the story: 2 fractured metatarsals and a hairline fracture in the tibia. The doctor was grim. "You're lucky it wasn't worse," he said, clipboard in hand. "But this is serious. You need to stay completely off this foot for at least 6 weeks. No exceptions. We'll schedule surgery for tomorrow morning to set the bones properly with pins." Maya stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. Surgery. 6 weeks. It was a lifetime. The demonstration was in 3 hours. She thought of her team, the young engineers she had mentored, who had finally found their confidence. She thought of Finch, who had taken an impossible risk on her. She thought of the mission. The contract. The future of the company. It all depended on a flawless flight, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that Marcus would find a way to sabotage it if he was at the controls. He would rather see the company burn than let her succeed. The pain in her ankle was a roaring fire, but another fire burned hotter: her sense of duty. She had been in worse situations. She had set her own dislocated shoulder in the middle of a firefight. She had run on a sprained knee for miles to reach an extraction point. Pain was just a signal, data to be processed and managed. It was not a stop sign. "I need my bag," she said to the nurse, her voice calm and resolute. The nurse, seeing the look in her eyes, didn't argue. She retrieved Maya's worn canvas duffel bag from the locker. Inside, beneath a change of clothes, was a small, unassuming medical kit, a relic from her old life. It contained things you wouldn't find in a standard first aid box: high-tensile medical tape, lightweight composite splinting materials, and single-use injectors of a powerful, non-narcotic painkiller used by special forces. She dismissed the nurse, saying she needed to rest. The moment the door closed, she went to work. With methodical precision, she began to construct a rigid splint over her cast, using the composite materials and wrapping them tightly with the high-tensile tape. She was building a cage for her broken bones, a temporary exoskeleton that would allow her to bear weight, even if for just a few hours. The process was agonizing. Every movement sent waves of nausea and white-hot pain through her body. Sweat beaded on her forehead. But her hands were steady, her focus absolute. This was just another battlefield improvisation. The objective was the mission. Her body was just a piece of equipment. Finally, she administered the painkiller, a sharp sting in her thigh that was quickly followed by a blessed, numbing coolness that pushed the worst of the agony to a manageable distance. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood up, testing her weight on the splint. It held. The pain was still there, a deep, throbbing ache, but it was background noise now. She could function. She found a discarded crutch in the corner, and using it for support, she began the slow, painful journey back to the Aether lab. Meanwhile, in the demonstration hall, a palpable tension filled the air. The Department of Defense delegation, a group of stern-faced generals and impassive bureaucrats, had arrived. Alastair Finch was pacing, his face pale with stress. He had just come from the infirmary, and had been told Maya was resting, prepped for surgery. Marcus was at the control console, looking smug and authoritative, briefing the generals on the drone's capabilities, carefully using the word "I" whenever he described a key innovation. "As I redesigned the flight control system," he would say, taking credit for all of Maya's work. Finch felt sick. He knew this was a disaster waiting to happen. Just as one of the generals began to ask a pointed question about the drone's performance under signal jamming conditions, the doors to the hall slid open. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. It was Maya. She was pale, her face etched with pain, but she was upright. She leaned heavily on a single crutch, her left leg stiff, and wrapped in a makeshift splint over the white cast. A collective gasp went through the room. Finch stared, his heart leaping into his throat. Marcus froze mid-sentence, his face a mask of pure shock. Maya hobbled forward, each step a visible effort of will. Her eyes, however, were clear and sharp, burning with an unyielding intensity. They were the eyes of a commander taking control of her battlefield. She stopped beside the console, her gaze sweeping over the generals, Finch, and finally settling on Marcus. She didn't say a word to him. She didn't need to. Her presence was a judgment. She turned to Finch and gave him a short, sharp nod. "I'm ready," she said, her voice quiet but carrying across the silent room. She then looked at the lead general. "Broken bones heal," she stated, her voice as hard as steel. "A mission is a mission. Let's fly." A hush fell over the demonstration hall. The generals exchanged glances, their stern expressions shifting to ones of intrigued respect. Alastair Finch felt a wave of awe wash over him. This was more than just dedication, it was a display of grit he had only ever read about in military citations. Marcus, recovering from his shock, tried to reassert his control. "Maya, you shouldn't be here," he said, his voice laced with false concern. "You're seriously injured." "I can handle this." Maya didn't even look at him. She pulled a spare chair to the console with her free hand and sat down, carefully positioning her injured leg. She placed her hands on the keyboard, her fingers hovering over the controls. "Launch the Aether," she said, her voice a clear command to the launch coordinator. Marcus was effectively erased from the equation. The massive bay doors at the end of the hall retracted, revealing the gray morning sky. With a low whine of its electric motors, the Aether drone lifted off the platform, its movements impossibly smooth and stable. It ascended into the sky, a perfect, silent predator. Maya's eyes were locked on the telemetry data streaming across her screen. The first part of the demonstration was a series of complex aerial maneuvers designed to showcase the drone's agility and stability. The Aether performed them flawlessly, banking, climbing, and diving with the grace of a hawk. The generals murmured their approval. Finch allowed himself a small, hopeful smile. Marcus stood behind them, his fists clenched, his face a thunderous mask of impotent rage. He had been so close. Now, all he could do was watch as she reaped the rewards of his treachery. But he had one last card to play. As Maya initiated the final test, a high-speed, low-altitude pass, he subtly palmed a small, custom-built signal jammer from his pocket. He had designed it himself, a last-ditch effort to ensure failure if his accident plan didn't work. It was tuned to a specific frequency that would override the drone's primary gyrostabilizer control, a vulnerability only he knew about because he had coded it in himself as a hidden backdoor. He pressed the button. On the screen, a critical system warning flashed red. Alarm, gyrostabilization failure. The holographic display showed the drone lurching violently. On the live video feed, they all watched in horror as the real Ether drone began to tumble, spiraling towards the ground in a terrifying death dive. "We've lost control," a technician shouted. Panic erupted in the control room. The generals rose to their feet, their faces grim. This was the catastrophic failure they were trained to spot. Finch's heart sank. It was over. Marcus allowed a small, cruel smirk to touch his lips. He had won. But he had underestimated his opponent. Maya didn't panic. Her face became a mask of intense concentration. Her special forces training kicked in, the part of her that thrived in chaos, that saw solutions where others saw only disaster. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, a blur of motion. She wasn't just piloting the drone anymore. She was performing open-heart surgery on its code, live in midair. "Manual override," she commanded, her voice cutting through the panic. "I'm bypassing the primary flight controller. Rerouting stabilization control to the auxiliary thruster processors." It was a move of breathtaking audacity, something that was theoretically possible but had never been attempted outside of a simulator. It required a deep, intuitive understanding of the machine's every system. She was rewriting the drone's nervous system while it was falling out of the sky. The pain in her ankle flared, a white-hot scream demanding her attention, but she walled it off, pushing it into a box in the corner of her mind. All that existed was the screen, the code, and the falling drone. The ground rushed up to meet the ether. 10 feet. 5 feet. The generals held their breath. Then, with a sudden, powerful roar, the auxiliary thrusters fired in a precise, asymmetric pattern. The drone's chaotic tumble ceased. It leveled out, hovering perfectly still, just inches above the grass. A collective sigh of relief filled the room. But Maya wasn't finished. With calm, deliberate keystrokes, she guided the drone back into the sky. She didn't just recover it, she completed the high-speed pass flawlessly, using her makeshift control system. She then brought the ether back to the launch platform, landing it with a gentle precision that was nothing short of miraculous. For a long moment, there was complete silence. Then, the lead general began to clap. Slowly, deliberately. The other officials joined in, followed by the entire engineering team. The applause was thunderous. They weren't just clapping for the technology. They were clapping for her. For the woman with the broken ankle and an unbreakable will, who had snatched victory from the jaws of certain disaster. Amid the applause, Finch's eyes narrowed. He had seen Marcus's smirk. He had seen the flicker of triumph in his eyes just before the failure. And he knew, with a cold certainty, what had happened. His gaze shifted from Maya's heroic face to Marcus's pale, terrified one. The mission was over. The debriefing was about to begin. In the aftermath of the triumphant demonstration, the atmosphere at Innovate Dynamics was electric. The DoD contract, the largest in the company's history, was secured. The Ether project was not just saved, it was legendary. But Alastair Finch was not celebrating. He was in the security office, his face grim, replaying the footage from the demonstration hall. He zoomed in on Marcus Thorne at the exact moment the drone began to fail. He saw the subtle movement of his hand in his pocket. He saw the unmistakable smirk of a saboteur. He then pulled the drone's internal logs. The gyro failure wasn't random. It was triggered by a specific, unauthorized radio frequency, a frequency that had originated from inside the control room. The evidence was undeniable. Finch found Marcus in his office, hastily packing his belongings into a box. He didn't look up as Finch entered. "You have 5 minutes to get out of my building," Finch said, his voice dangerously quiet. Marcus finally looked at him, his face a mixture of fear and defiance. "You can't prove anything, I don't have to," Finch replied, placing a small device on the desk, the signal jammer, which security had found in a trash can near the exit. "The log files, the security footage, and this. It's more than enough for a lifetime of litigation. Or you can just disappear. Your choice." Marcus paled. He grabbed his box and walked out without another word, his career in ruins, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale of arrogance and spite. Finch then went to the infirmary, where Maya was finally allowing the doctors to properly set her ankle. She was exhausted, pale, but her eyes were clear. "I reviewed the logs," Finch said, sitting beside her bed. "And the security footage. I know what he did. Both last night and today. I am so sorry. I brought him into this company. I allowed his ego to fester." Maya just nodded. "In my old job, we learned that the biggest threat often comes from the inside. You deal with it, and you move on." Finch looked at her, at the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her. "I don't just want to offer you a job, Maya. That feels insufficient. I want to build a new division around you. A special projects division. You'll have complete autonomy, your own team, your own budget. You won't just be building drones. You'll be solving the impossible problems. The ones no one else can touch." Maya was silent for a long moment. It was everything she had run away from, the pressure, the responsibility, the visibility. But she realized, lying in that hospital bed, that hiding in the shadows hadn't healed her. It had just kept her wounds from seeing the light. Facing this challenge, leading this team, saving this project, that was the first time she had felt whole in years. "Why me?" she asked quietly. After the demonstration, Finch said, leaning forward, "General Miller, the head of the delegation, pulled me aside. He asked who you were. I told him your name and your naval background. He knew. He knew of the incident you mentioned." Maya's body tensed. "He said the official report was that your team was ambushed, and a critical piece of equipment was lost because of a design flaw. But he told me the unofficial story. That the equipment didn't have a design flaw. It was damaged in the ambush. And you, under enemy fire, jerry-rigged a solution that saved the rest of your team and the mission. But you were the commander. So you took the fall for the lost equipment. You didn't fail, Maya. You sacrificed yourself to protect your people." Tears welled in Maya's eyes, the first she had shed in years. The guilt she had carried, the failure she had blamed herself for, was a lie she had told herself to justify her retreat from the world. Finch stood up and offered her his hand. "You never stopped being a commander, Maya. You just needed a new mission. Welcome back." She took his hand, her grip firm. Her journey through the shadows was over. She had been found. And she was finally ready to step back into the light. "So I ask you again, who are the invisible people in your world? The ones you walk past every day without a second glance. What strength lies hidden behind their quiet exteriors?" Maya's story teaches us that a person's value is not determined by their title, their uniform, or their paycheck. It is forged in the fires of adversity and revealed not when things are easy, but when everything is on the line. True strength isn't about having no scars, it's about having the courage to stand up and fight, even with broken bones, because the mission, the team, the purpose, is more important than the pain. The world is full of people like Marcus, who will try to injure you, to sabotage you, to keep you in your place because your light shines on their own inadequacies. But it is also full of people like Maya, warriors in hiding, waiting for the chance to remind the world what true character looks like. Look around you. See the person, not the job. Recognize the potential that lies dormant in the most unexpected places. And never, ever underestimate the quiet ones. They might just be the ones who save us all. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that their past does not define their future, and that even in the darkest of moments, they have the strength to complete the mission. Remind them that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes, they wear a janitor's uniform and carry the heart of a warrior.